Sometimes we have to come full circle and return to our childhood to rediscover something that we used to love that we can now turn into a business. That's exactly what my guest for this episode did. Her name is Sarah JanTausch, and she is the founder of SRJ Coaching and Consulting and the creator of the value-based career method. We have a really fun conversation about how she transformed her career to become a coach. I'm Larry Cornett, and this is Invincible Solopreneurs. Welcome to the show, Sarah. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So I want to start with perhaps telling the listeners a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, great. I'm the founder of SRJ Coaching Consulting, but really what that means is I get to help people find the work that they love that blends their skills, passions, interests. And typically I work with mid-career professionals, so people who have some experience and who might be hitting that plateau of, I thought I really liked this for the past decade, but it's no longer hitting that for me, and I have no idea where to go.
Yeah.
So I work with those folks, and I love working with them and helping them find what that is. And I'm also the creator of the generosity-based network framework and values-based careers.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, we're going to get into that because I have questions, and I'm sure everybody listening is like, tell me more about that. But interesting. You have such an interesting background.
Thank you.
Before you launched your consulting business, your coaching business, you had what you had thought was going to be your dream career. You're talking about dream careers, working in politics and government in Ohio, of all places, which is amazing. Maybe talk a little bit more about what that was like and what sparked your decision to make a pivot from that career choice.
Yeah. So my background, my undergraduate degree was in politics and government. Went straight into working in government here in Ohio and had a lot of fun at the beginning. So I got to do a lot of different things, worked in boards and commissions, got to see how big government really is. And then I did some education policy work. And it was always the thing that I thought I was going to go into government. The plan of starting when I was 9 years old, I should tell you, was I was going to be a lawyer. I decided when I was 9 years old, I'm going to be a lawyer. That is the plan. That's what's happening. And my senior year of college, I started studying for the LSAT, and I went, this doesn't feel right. Mm-hmm. And that was the first big moment that something started to shift for me, but I didn't know what it was until much later. So I didn't go straight into law school. I went straight into the workforce, which is probably the best thing for me. And I got promoted, and then I got promoted again, and things were going really well because I had this value of achievement, and I went all in on it.
Sure.
I ended up leaving government because I was working for an administration and we were term limited. So they could no longer run again. So my job naturally ended.
Okay. Yeah.
And I actually really liked that last job. So I was a little sad about that. But that was a point in which I was looking for, what am I going to do next? There was part of me that had always wanted to create something, but I didn't know what to do with that. So I didn't give it a lot of credit. And then there was another part of me that's like, let's explore. And so I explored lobbying, I explored government relations, I explored all these different things. And I went through a period of trial and error with networking. And a lot of my networking was not great. I'm
That's
sorry
true for many people.
Right? If anyone who's listening to me now networked with me then, I'm so sorry. But in all seriousness, I had this period of trial and error. In a very short period of time, I had 50 informational interviews. And I learned so much during that period of time. I learned two things. There's a mindset piece to this, and we can talk a little bit about that in a couple minutes and some of those guiding principles. And there's a framework for really effective networking, and it is not transactional networking that everyone does.
Yes.
A couple of years after that, I was invited in to a university to speak on that topic. And because of that work, I had to formalize it, and it's generosity-based networking. But that whole process, I had no idea I would get into this field. I couldn't find the job I wanted in government. So I took a job out of passion, and I started doing some work in nonprofits. And I thought it was going to be the key. I thought passion was going to be it, and it was not. And it was a very rude awakening. And I'm going, I thought this was going to solve all of my other pain points that I had, like maybe the lack of passion in some of my government roles. And it was a very hard transition where I was like, okay, what am I going to do? So in a period of a year, I started a business, finished my master's degree, and ran for public office. And I was exhausted.
I bet.
And then the pandemic hit. And I was like, oh no. And it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because that first business failed. And it was the thing, if it had not failed, I would not be doing the work that I'm meant to be doing.
Sure.
I'm doing that
Yeah.
now. So that was kind of the little bit of the framework that got me here. When I started this business, I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but I knew that I loved helping people. And I knew I really liked helping pull goals out of people and help them find the careers that they were interested in. And that's something that started when I was in high school, but it wasn't nurtured. And so I put together a pilot. I ran the pilot. Everyone in my pilot met their goals. I thought, we'll see. I was like, I'm probably going to fail. Sure. And one person who had been job searching for over a year found a job in 30 days.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
It knocked my socks off. To be honest with you, I was not expecting that. And so that was the moment where I knew, like, there's something here. And looking back on it now, there were so many moments along the way that make sense.
Right. When you look back, you're like, oh, yeah.
Right. It all makes sense. It was this journey of curiosity to getting to where I am now.
Sure. Yeah. I love it. That's so good. Yeah, that's a common problem because there's been some bad advice for many years about following your passion. And I wrote an article about this once. I was like, what I have heard time and again from people is that they turn a passion into a business and they fall out of love with the passion. And it's like, this isn't fun anymore. I don't enjoy this once it became a business, right? So it's not the best advice to follow your passion. And I'm sure, I know a lot of people listening are thinking about a career change. So they're either looking for a job, they're thinking about looking for a job, or even a bigger change like you made. And I've heard this from people where they get to a point in their career and like, I think I need something different. I want to make a pivot. And they're just trying to figure out, is this the time? Should I do this? Should I stay the course? What signs do you think tell them, yeah, it's time for a change? And once they recognize that, what steps can they take? And you talked a little bit about what you did, but how can they make that leap? Because it is a big leap to make a career pivot.
It's a huge leap. And there are some risks that come with it, but the reward, if you make the right decision, is huge, and it outweighs all of it.
Right.
Some of the indicators I see are, the common ones: Sunday scaries, burnout, constantly complaining about your boss or your work when you're not at work. It's a huge one, right? Like annoying your friends and family.
Exactly.
Those are really obvious ones. There are also there are more subtle ones. Like one of the ones that we often don't talk about is that like gnawing inside that you really can't define. I had this. I wanted to create something, but I could never put the words to it.
Sure.
And it's been with me since my early 20s. And I never knew it was this, right? This business, this thing, but I knew I wanted to create something and I had no idea what that was. For a long time, I just thought that was dabbling in art. And ultimately it wasn't. So if there's something that is bothering you about like what you're doing, or there's just this sort of gnawing or misalignment, that's a huge red flag that most likely there's a time for a change and there's a values alignment piece.
Right.
Where you might not be living in those values, or your work isn't in those values.
All too common. Literally just had a coaching conversation today about it where they're like, I don't feel like my values are aligned with my leadership's values and the way they're treating people. And I said, that can happen. And it's very hard to change a massive corporation from the inside as one person, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you need to make a change. Sometimes you need to build your own business like you did. And you do talk about this a lot. So this focus, you have it on your website too, this values-based career. So I want to dive into that because I think that's important. And there's probably a couple of steps of, well, what are my values? So trying to crystallize and document, like, what do I stand for? What do I believe in? And then the next step is like, well, then how do I get to do work that's aligned with that?
Yeah. The thing that I see most people who want to make a job change, they go, okay, I need a new resume.
Right.
What they really need. They need a new resume.
They start with a resume,
And that's going to define it. And like we jokingly say this, right? But what we really need to do is go, 10 steps back. What are your core values? Because most likely, most people do not actually know what they are, have them written down or clearly defined.
Totally agree.
They might
Yep.
have them in their head, right? A couple of two or here or there. But the question that I like to always ask, are those your values or are they somebody else's values?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I usually recommend, I have a tool that I use. It's called a values card sort. It's created by somebody much smarter than me at a university who's a PhD. But I love this because it's a tactile exercise that I send to my clients. They literally print them out, cut out the values cards, and it is the most difficult thing for them. They come back to me and they go, why was that so hard? That took me hours. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but also like it simplifies everything from here on out.
Right. Yeah.
And I make them identify their top 5. And they have to choose, and that's the hard part. But once they choose, they have these really solid reasons. And from there, that's a core tenet. That's like one of the 5 key components of deciding on the work. But that's the core one. And I don't think you can find meaningful work without starting there.
Yeah. I have a similar thing, and I have people prioritize it because I said in a perfect world you get everything you want, but that's not going to happen. So you're going to have to do something really hard, which is what's number one. They're like, well, I don't have just a number one. I said, you got to pick a number one. Yeah. And then once you have one, then okay, what's number 2? And you kind of work down the list, but it does drive everything else because everybody, well, I want to be satisfied and fulfilled and rich, and I want to have autonomy, and I want creativity, and I want, like, okay, what do you want the most? Because sometimes, and I'm sure you've coached people through this, you're going to get to a situation where one job's going to pay more than the other, but one job's going to have better alignment with your values than the other. And are you willing to accept less money to have better alignment with your values? That happens a lot. And it's a tough choice for people. It is a tough choice, and I understand. And I'm glad you do that. Yeah, the card sort stuff's exciting. We used to do, I'm a psychologist long ago, and we would do card sorting to kind of look for relationships. Physical is like, it's so powerful to do that.
It is. I love, like, I tell them to like clear off a table and just like spend that, like lay them all out and see what they're drawn to. And it's pretty amazing because once you start identifying these values and you talk to them about it, stories start popping out from the childhood and pivotal moments start popping out. And you can start to see these things are more important than the values they might have thought they would have told me about. I'd be curious to hear from you. Sometimes when I ask them what their values are before I give them this activity, they start telling me their criteria for their job. I want this salary and I want it to be remote. And I'm like, I love asking that question because it's never about their values. It's always what the criteria they want. And then they're not happy in their job. But it's fun for me. But do you hear that?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people start, like you said, from the resume. They're like, oh, I need to tweak my resume in LinkedIn. And I'm like, well, what are you looking for? They don't know. And I said, well, you can't tune your resume in LinkedIn until you're clear about what you're looking for. And before you know what you're looking for, you have to understand yourself. Like, what lights you up? What makes you unhappy? What are you good at? What are you not good at? What do you care about? And once you understand yourself, then you can look out into the world and say, what is going to map to what I am and what I want to be and what I want? And it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. Because if you do that, just you have that discussion where you're like, okay, would you take more money if your boss yelled at you every day? And they're like, no. Would you take more money if you were working for a company? And I turned down a company once that their business was gambling. And I said, I don't believe in gambling. You know, I think it really creates a problem for this world and addiction and so forth. I said, would you do that? Work for a gambling company? They're like, well, no. And I said, okay, you've got some values. So let's take a step back and think about that. It's so powerful. It is so powerful because I think when we're really, really young and just getting started, any job's a good job. We kind of feel that way. And we have a lot of bad experiences, maybe a few good experiences. But as you get farther along in your career and you have more skills and experience and you have more choice, because you should be becoming more valuable in the market, you get the luxury of doing that and you've earned it. So why not? Why not find something that's going to make you, like you said, not have the Sunday scaries, get up on Monday and say, I'm excited to go to work today. I like what we do. I believe in it. It's important. So you mentioned something, and we had talked about this when we first met, that even as a child, you had a passion for testing and psychometrics, and you kind of, ignored it and just said, oh, whatever. And you went off and did kind of I call it your first act career. And then you found your way to your second act career. That's interesting. I love that story. If you could share a little bit for the audience.
Absolutely. I had no idea what to do with that information, to be honest with you. I was raised in a small town that was pretty homogenous. And for me to be interested in all of these sort of things, no one around me was interested in these things. And I certainly had family influences. One side of my family, they were doctors and lawyers. So you can probably catch where the lawyer thing came from.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't help myself when I would talk to my friends and my family. I would just have these conversations like, what are you interested in? What are you doing? And so often they would just get so annoyed with me or like not know what to do with the question. And so I took their responses as like, make this part of you smaller. Yeah, and that was the message I had. And I had no idea. I mean, I had no idea at the time. And I took my first assessment. I want to say it might have been StrengthsFinder or something like that. I have taken in my lifetime every single one I can get my hands on at this point, which is a lot. And I remember taking StrengthsFinder. I think I've taken StrengthsFinder like 3 times now, but I remember taking that and I was just, my eyes were open and I thought this thing was fascinating. And every time I've gone to like a work event or like a training course, I just take every single one because there's so much data and insights I've gotten from them.
Yeah.
And then I've started to use them. And I made a partnership, and I have a partner who is a certified assessment professional, and she's fantastic, and she administers a pathway planner for me, for my clients. And I love this one because it's a core traits tool. And it's more psychologically valid. Like there are interest indicators and personality assessments, which are all really interesting. And I love them all, but they serve different purposes. Sure. And this one I really love because it tells us, who you are, what your passions are, things like that, but it matches up with occupational data. And when I took this assessment, this is several years into my business, by the way. So like I'm already working in this career development field. I'm already doing all of this. I take this assessment, I get the results. It matches me up to the Department of Labor's, all the jobs. And a job that filtered to the top. And I will say there were some other like government jobs on there, not a ton. A job I never considered, by the way. But the one that like really jumped out to me is it said career advisor. And if you had asked me when I was 9 years old if I would ever go into career advising, I would have been like, I don't know what that is. And no, that sounds boring.
Yeah, exactly.
My path was winding to get here. And I think in so many ways, if I hadn't had the path that I had, I probably wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing because, the pivot was part of that. But that was that moment where like, in so many ways, I don't know if at that point I needed the data validation, but it was really cool. And I geeked out over it. And so I'm still exploring all the assessments and taking every one I can get. But
yeah, why not, right? You got to know yourself. I mean, it's Socrates, I think, said that one of the greatest powers is knowing yourself. You have to really know yourself. I remember my very first assessment. It was in early high school. I think back on it all the time because it was so funny. And it came back and it said, okay, you could either be a lumberjack or a priest.
Those are very different.
I was like,
interesting.
I was like, what do I do with this information?
I mean, at that point.
Well, I'm a coach and I live in the forest now. And coach, I'm sure you've seen, a lot of people confess a lot of stuff to you. So maybe it wasn't wrong. But at the time I was like, yeah, right. I went into mechanical engineering and I was like, okay. It just cracked me up. But it's so important. And a friend of mine is very big in the StrengthsFinder. She loves it. Use it for a lot of stuff, a lot of those analyses, because it does help to see yourself, and it does help to have an objective test and somebody who can interpret it for you and say, what am I seeing here? Because it can be a tough path to get to where you are. I think you're right. I look back, it's like, I think I needed the mistakes and I needed some of the pain to have an appreciation for helping people not have as much pain. And that's kind of my goal is I don't want other people to suffer as much as I did to get to where I am. Because you go through a lot of pain. And one of the things, and that was a good revelation there, they tell you is, what would you do if you didn't get paid? Like, you don't get paid to do it and you enjoy doing it and you couldn't help yourself. As a child, you're so interested and passionate about this. And for decades, I was coaching people on the side. We'd go get a cup of coffee and well, what should I do for my career move? Should I take this job? And I just did it over a cup of coffee. And then lo and behold, here we are. Both of us coaching
That's
now.
exactly how it worked. I mean, that was my free pilot. Like, I had never had work where I couldn't wipe the smile off of my face when I was done.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew. And the fact that I've never gotten bored with it or anything like that,
Sure.
or like the challenges that pop up. Like you kept doing it over those coffee chats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing better. And it is, they tell you, and I didn't believe when I was young, I do now, that nothing makes you feel better than helping other people. And it's this gift, and it's true. You help somebody get through a challenge, you help them get a job, you help them find something that makes them light up and not feel so sad every Monday. And you smile, you feel good. You're like, it's such a good feeling. It really is to help people. And speaking of people, there are so many people struggling right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the market. We had a great market for a few years, kind of pre and early pandemic, I think, was a bit of an employees market, and jobs everywhere, growth everywhere. It was amazing. That's changed. I've definitely seen a change in the last probably 3 years. It's gotten pretty dry, and people are struggling. And they're trying to figure out, where do I apply? How do I find jobs on LinkedIn and all these job boards? There's now the epidemic I just shared. There's like 81% of recruiters have been posting ghost jobs. They're not really there. They're kind of a bait and switch, or they just want to test the market or whatever it might be. And so people are like, how can this be that I just applied to this job and they tell me, oh, we already filled the position? It's like, how did you fill the position? You just opened this job. So it's making it even more challenging. What are you seeing in the market and with your clients in terms of the job market right now and the struggles they're facing?
It is taking, in some cases, 2 or 3 times as long as I was saying a couple of years ago. And I hate to say that. I don't want to discourage anyone, but that is the reality of the market that we're in. And I'm finding it's taking more applications, more time. But I will say, the people who are using what I typically recommend of a 2-prong approach, cold applying, on all those job boards, but then networking too, those are the people that are finding things. It still takes a lot longer than it's typically taken. Right. And I think it's because that dynamic had shifted. In Ohio, I think the stat I heard a couple of weeks ago at an economic forum is that we have 3 open jobs for every unemployed worker, which is also kind of interesting to look at the stats from that perspective. We've got so many open jobs, but people that aren't aligned. So clearly there's a gap in terms of expectations, I think, between employees and employers and what people want. But besides that, networking speeds it up quite a bit. And so I've been spending so much time. I talk about networking a lot anyway, but with my clients, really trying to help them shift into being able to use that, especially the ones who are very afraid of it and are really have never done it and don't feel comfortable with it.
It can be scary.
Which is most of them. It is scary. I remember in the beginning, years ago, I'm an introvert. I would sign up to these networking events, and I was in an outreach role in government. This was I'd try to be like, okay, I need a transition job. I'm going to go to this networking event. I would drive there. I would park my car, and I'd be like, I can't do this. My body would literally freeze. And I remember there's one time where I called my boyfriend, my husband at the time, and I said, I can't do this. I started crying, and I was like, I'm leaving. Turn on the car. I left. I don't do that anymore. But networking is really scary. So just say that, I get it, but networking speeds it up, but it's still a horrible market.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't change that fact.
I just coached a new grad that just graduated from college this year. And I said, and we were talking, and I'm a big networking believer too. And both of us, I know, and we've talked about the networking and the power of it. And I said, it's a tough market, cold applying. There's thousands of people applying, and it's really hard, really hard. And I said, I know it's not going to be easy, but this networking, I prefer to call it connecting. So it's not that cocktail party. I used to go to those too. It's like, so uncomfortable. Side of the room watching the crowd. It's just not my thing. So I said, in this case, you haven't had really a job yet. So it's kind of hard. You don't have a network, but you do have an alumni network. So I want you to go in, do an advanced search in LinkedIn and look for people who are doing the work you're interested in data science. and look for alumni of UC Davis, where he went to school. And he found people. And I said, okay, now reach out. And I'm going to tell you, I've been on the other side of this where students reach out to me. I always talk to them. I just had a call with a student today. I want to help my alumni. I want to help students. Everybody wants to help a young kid get their start.
Yeah.
He said, he responded to me right away. And I said, I bet he did. And we're going to have a phone call. And he said, and he had the phone call. He said, it was so easy. He was really friendly and he was talking about his kids and going trick-or-treating with his kids. And he said, I thought it was going to be really scary, but he was laid back and he referred me to somebody else. He introduced me to another hiring manager. And I said, perfect. And he hadn't even cold applied or done anything. He said, oh, send me your resume. I'll give it to her and we'll talk and I'll introduce you to her. So you get that warm introduction. And most people ignore all the LinkedIn InMail because you get so much spam. But when a person who's a colleague says, oh, talk to this kid, they're like, oh, sure. Okay. And so he's finding that working this alumni connection, this community, is opening doors that otherwise would be shut to him. Yeah. It's so cool. It's so powerful. Oh, so if you had a time machine, this is a funny question. What advice would you give to your younger self? And we kind of hinted at some of it, but seeing in hindsight's 2020 where you are today and the path that you took, is there anything you would tell your younger self that you think might have helped this journey?
There are two things, and they kind of go hand in hand. And one is that curiosity, I believe, is the gateway to redefining success and finding something that's actually going to work. That, Friday used to be my favorite day of the week.
Right.
Now it's Monday, which I never thought would be.
Yeah, wild.
The second part of that is people are going to tell you so much advice. They're going to tell you advice. They're going to tell you things. They're going to come from their lens.
Sure.
We say take everything with a grain of salt, which is a great adage. But what I really wish I could have told myself is that understand and take a moment to think about where their perspective is coming from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And take the things that make sense for you. And if it does not make sense, write it down, turn the page, go back to it if it makes sense. But don't just take the things that people say and go do that. Because I got so much advice and I would act on it and then it wouldn't turn out well. Or it would be a further mismatch with my values and it made me more unhappy with my career.
Right. Yeah.
And listening to people is great. It's more so listening to their perspective and not taking everything and immediately acting on it.
Yeah. That's good advice. Yeah. Yeah. For many years, I think I followed, like you talked about, the values-based approach, and I was following someone else's values. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And I succeeded. That's the funny thing. And it felt hollow. I was like, okay, I got what I was supposed to get. What this person said was important and it worked, but I don't like where I am. And I think that happens to a lot of people, is that even if they have great success, they kind of reach the peak of this mountain. They look around, they're like, I don't like this. I thought I would. And I looked around and said, I don't like the people I see up here, the way they're behaving and treating people like very senior executives. It's not who I am. I'm not going to be that ruthless. I just can't. I tried. I tried, and it just couldn't. So it wasn't aligned with my values. And that's why even after spending 20 years building that career, I was like, it's time to move on. Right. Yeah. So I love that you do that. And I love that you take that approach with your folks to get clear about who they are and what matters to them before they even think about looking for that job. Yeah. So important. So where can people find you? Where's the best place to find you on the internet and learn more about your practice and reach out to you?
Valuesbasedcareers.com. That's where you can find me. I'm also on LinkedIn.
Love it. And for everybody listening, I'll have links in the show notes so that you can go and check it out if that'd be easier for you. But thank you, Sarah. It was really great having you on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was great to talk to your listeners.
Until next time, I wish you the best of luck with building the business of your dreams.